Praia de Omaha, 23 de agosto de 1944. Um mês e meio depois do dia D, o soldado Jack Kirby desembarca num planeta diferente. Com apenas 27 anos, este soldado americano faz parte dos reforços para combater o Terceiro Reich na Europa. Mas Jack não era uma pessoa qualquer. Era um artista de banda desenhada que, em conjunto com Joe Simon, tinha acabado de criar o famoso super-herói Capitão América e os Boy Commandos, que tiveram muito sucesso durante a guerra. Os Estados Unidos entraram na guerra em 1941, depois do ataque dos japoneses a Pearl Harbor. Mas o exército dos aliados só desembarcou na Normandia 3 anos depois. Durante esses 3 anos, as indústrias do cinema e da banda desenhada produzem propaganda para preparar o povo dos Estados Unidos para a realidade da guerra. Jack Kirby contribuiu com a sua arte, tendo representado o desembarque de 1943, um ano antes de ter acontecido. Mas nessa altura, ainda não sabia que teria de participar na Segunda Guerra Mundial de verdade. Jeremy, o neto de Jack Kirby, visita com emoção a praia onde teve lugar o dia D. É a primeira vez que vem à Normandia, atrás do rastro do avô.
The beach is absolutely beautiful. I'm sure it was a lot different, 75 years ago or so, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. My grandfather would often tell stories about landing in France, landing here actually. Usually, I think it was a few weeks after, the original invasion, but he still said that there might have been bodies just kind of laying around. I'm not sure if that was actually what happened or not, but it was amazing.
Veterans are sometimes confused. There was no corpse here anymore. They were buried 2 months before Jack Kirby landed on Omaha Beach. They were buried in a small cemetery in Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer nearby. That's pretty common, the veterans are confused, and he was probably confused with another battle that took place a few weeks after in Moselle, the Battle of Dorno, and where he could see corpses everywhere. And that's quite common, with veterans.
Jack Kirby, cujo nome verdadeiro era Jacob Kurtzberg, nasceu em 1917 no Lower East Side, um bairro pobre de Nova York com muitos imigrantes judeus.
The Lower East Side, when Kirby was here, was an incredible mass of humanity, very poor, hardworking, lots of crime, lots of love, lots of just so much going on that when you put so many people together in such a place.
Jack passou grande parte da sua infância a lutar. Fazia parte do Essex Street Gang, um dos muitos chamados gangues de miúdos. Estes grupos de rapazes de diferentes etnias que viviam no mesmo bairro estavam sempre em conflito. Jack não fazia ideia que essas lutas seriam um prelúdio para as lutas bem mais sangrentas que enfrentou nas frentes francesas durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial. Mais tarde, perto do fim da sua vida, desenhou uma dezena de pranchas quase autobiográficas com o título Street Code. Representam o dia-a-dia de um miúdo, provavelmente o próprio Jack Kirby, que vivia num edifício em ruínas, lar de desfavorecidos.
your grandfather used to fight a lot during his childhood, and he kept from that the ability to fight, and that certainly helped him to survive the campaign of France.
Yeah, absolutely. I think his life really could have gone a different direction had he not have been involved with something like that. I mean, he would tell stories how on his block, I mean, he would hang out with gangsters. They'd just be sitting there, you know, in front of the storefronts or at the restaurants, and at one point he realized I could go down this path, which was a shiny path, you know, where everyone else is in poverty, they had nice suits. And a lot of the young kids wanted that, but he realized that there's more out there than that, because those same people didn't have families. Those same people were still taking from others to build themselves up. And he wanted to do something different. And I think with drawing, with his artistic talents, with the ability to create new characters, it brought him out of that life and into something positive that he was able to share with everyone. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, at that time there was the financial crisis of 1929, and well, it strongly affected his family. You know, his father was broke. He lost his job, and well, so. I think it was very difficult on the world economy, on the American economy.
A crise rebentou a 29 de outubro de 1929 na Bolsa de Valores de Nova Iorque. Desencadeou a Grande Depressão, a maior crise económica do século XX. A miséria e o desemprego eram abundantes. Jack Kirby, com 12 anos, trabalhava como vendedor de jornais para sustentar a família. Foi salvo da delinquência pela Boys Brotherhood Republic.
BBR stood for Boys Brotherhood Republic, and today BGR stands for Boys and Girls Republic. BBR is a very special place and a very special program of the Henry Street Settlement. Is a place for young people that live on the Lower East Side to come to access services. It's a place where they're nurtured, it's a place where they grow, it's a place where they're supported, and it's a place where they gain access to really important opportunities. And most of all, it's a place where they're safe and they're off the streets and they're working with caring adults.
Das atividades proporcionadas pela BBR, Jack interessava-se bastante pela arte e, com a ajuda dos seus tutores, publicou os seus primeiros desenhos no jornal da associação.
I think BBR was a critical part of Kirby's success. There are many famous people who've come through BBR, particularly in the area of the arts. People like Denzel Washington, people like Jerry Stiller, people like Luis Guzman, people like Larry Fishburne. And we feel really proud of that, and we feel that we provided individuals with really special opportunities.
Jack Kirby só vendeu a sua primeira banda desenhada em 1936. Mais tarde, em 1938, juntou-se ao estúdio do mestre americano Will Eisner, futuro criador da Spirit. Foi aqui que Jack Kirby aprendeu o seu ofício.
Jack Kirby came in one day with a portfolio. He was looking for work, so we hired him. He was good. That's how we came.
Em 1929, na Europa, a crise contribuiu para o crescimento do nazismo na Alemanha e a tomada de poder de Adolf Hitler em 1933. O antissemitismo tornou-se rapidamente a ponta de lança da sua política.
Like all Jewish American people, Jack Kirby was frightened by the war, and he could see it coming. And well, he was frightened by Adolf Hitler mostly, and he represented him in cartoons very early in his career. And I think it inspired him in creating most of his villains in these comics and in the future series.
I think it came down to something real simple for my grandfather. I think he realized right away that he was staring, when looking at Adolf Hitler, he was staring at a supervillain. So how do you fight a supervillain? You create a superhero. And that's where I think the imagination went, is we have to create these superheroes that are going to battle these fascists, these supervillains that are starting to pop up all over the world.
Well, something had to happen before, because he didn't invent the genre himself. It happened in 1938 with the birth of Superman in Action Comics #1 at DC Comics by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And then new characters popped up, you know, like you said, and like Batman and Captain America afterward,
1 de setembro de 1939 marca o início da Segunda Guerra Mundial. A Alemanha invade a Polónia, fazendo com que a Grã-Bretanha e França declarem guerra 2 dias depois. Os anos seguintes fariam deste conflito um dos mais mortíferos de toda a história, com 62 milhões de mortos. Por enquanto, os Estados Unidos decidem aguardar. Foi neste contexto que Jack Kirby foi contratado pela editora de banda desenhada Fox, onde conhece Joe Simon, um artista emergente como ele. Formaram uma equipa e, enquanto freelancers, entraram rapidamente na nova onda dos super-heróis de banda desenhada. Em 1940, criaram o herói Blue Bolt para a editora Novelty.
Once after he met Jack, he liked Jack's style a lot, and Jack liked Joe, and then they immediately became friends. And so Joe invited Jack to work on Blue Bolt.
O super-herói Blue Bolt começou por ser a estrela do futebol americano Fred Parrish. Depois de ser atingido por um relâmpago num desastre de avião, Fred recupera graças a uma cura experimental com rádio. O tratamento dá-lhe superpoderes que lhe permitem lutar contra vilões, incluindo os nazis, que tinham acabado de invadir a Polónia.
Joe, when he started, before he went into comics, he started in newspapers. A lot of comic book artists back then, they did care about what was in the world, what was going on, and, you know, comics, they reflected that. That's why you see a lot of World War II covers, you know. Something that I think really only Simon and Kirby did, you know, that was analyzing what went on, taking what exactly went on and putting it into the books. Joe was very good with that throughout his career. Even after Simon and Kirby, Joe would always see what was going on in newspapers and, you know, what was going on in world news.
So it was quite successful, but the time was, well, darkening, and it was, well, you could see the war coming, and that's why they had to create another character. It was Captain America.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it came at the right time. So it was, you know, it gave them the ability to get their thoughts, their emotions out, and yet tell a real interesting story that I think anyone at the time could understand. You didn't have to come from a disadvantaged home in New York. You could be a farm boy in Nebraska and still get that same feeling of camaraderie and that same feeling of excitement, you know, when the good guy is punching the bad guys. So.
Foi assim que participaram na propaganda anti-nazi da época. Eram obviamente influenciados pelos filmes de Hollywood e as notícias que eram projetadas nos cinemas antes dos filmes começarem e que apoiavam a campanha de propaganda.
This cover, it's one of my favorites. We have the Ringmaster of Death, who's actually a Nazi, and you have Captain America running in. Captain America was a kid. He was very skinny, very tiny, and he wanted to help the war. A scientist gave him an opportunity to, you know, join the army by drinking this untested formula, and Steve said he'll do it. He drank it, he became big, became the Steve Rogers that we know today, and the scientist, unfortunately, was killed by a Nazi. However, Steve, knowing what's right, having a good heart, decided to continue with and fight for America against the war.
Com o Capitão América e outras personagens como o Visão ou os Jovens Aliados, Kirby e Simon definiram para sempre o futuro estilo artístico da Marvel, focado na ação e no dinamismo. O primeiro volume do Capitão América foi lançado em dezembro de 1949 pela editora Timely, predecessora da Marvel. O sucesso foi imediato e foram vendidos 1 milhão de exemplares. A Timely vendeu o Capitão América aos cinemas e mudou-se para um escritório maior no Empire State Building. Quando Kirby voltou para a Marvel, em 1958, revolucionou novamente a banda desenhada, inventando o universo Marvel com Stan Lee. – 6 de dezembro de 1941, um ano depois do lançamento do primeiro volume de Capitão América, Pearl Harbor foi bombardeado por aviões japoneses. O Japão era um dos aliados dos nazis. O ataque chocou os Estados Unidos. Nesse dia, Jack Kirby ia sair do cinema com a sua esposa Roz, quando soube que os Estados Unidos tinham entrado na guerra.
A lot of people knew it was coming, and I think they realized it was a good fight. They wanted to get out there and they wanted to help. So, I mean, my grandfather would tell stories about, basically Pearl Harbor happening. Everyone's in the streets, they're cheering or they're excited. Some are sad, but emotions were really running high, So, especially for my grandfather, I think, he knew the eventuality that he would have to be coming and serving, and he understood that. Doesn't mean that he really was excited about the prospect of potentially losing his own life, and leaving behind my grandmother. So it was a difficult time.
In the pages of Captain America, he could foresee the Japanese attack, because in Captain America number 5, you have a bombardment, but the Japanese in the pages, it's some months before it actually happened. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
What they probably did was they looked at newspapers. They saw back then that they had used submarines, Germans had used submarines, and they said, well, Japanese, Germans, they're both allies right now. And what they would do is Joe and Jack would use a little bit of their imagination, which was very strong back then. And what they created a Japanese submarine that would basically attack American troops.
When Captain America came out, the publisher was menaced by the German-American Bund, the American sympathizers to the Nazi doctrines. Yes. And at that time, Martin Goodman asked the protection from the police, from the New York City Police. Yeah. And Jack Kirby received some phone calls asking him to go and fight real Americans, because he was badly representing Adolf Hitler and the Nazis and the Germans as a whole. He went to the rendezvous, can you imagine? He went to the appointment, and fortunately he could meet no one, and he was safe.
Foi precisamente nessa altura que Simon e Kirby trocam a Timely pelos adversários DC Comics, a editora do Super-Homem. Decidiram instalar o seu estúdio num bairro na zona leste de Manhattan.
They rented an apartment here in Tudor City. It was built very close to a slaughterhouse. It kind of smelled, and therefore the rents were pretty cheap. So, wouldn't you know it, some comic book artists were looking to start their studio. They had gotten a new gig with DC National Comics, the artists being Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, where they had people like George Russo's and Frank Giacoia, Carmine Infantino help them produce the work for Boy Commandos and Newsboy Legion and Sandman and the Manhunter.
For Detective Comics, they created an original series, and they played a little bit off the kid gang approach that was very common in the motion pictures of the time. The idea of having a bunch of young children being used as commandos behind the enemy lines, active in the war. They personified them by having them with either ethnic traits.
The Boy Commandos is a group led by Rip Carter, who is a captain, and again, Captain America. And he would lead a group of kids from across Europe to fight the war.
Criado em junho de 1942, Boy Commandos é outro sucesso instantâneo para a dupla, cujas vendas competiam com as do Super-Homem e do Batman. Os Boy Commandos são um grupo de miúdos de rua que estão sempre em lutas, tal como Kirby na sua infância. Sendo nativos de um país em guerra, entram no exército. Há o francês Pierre, o holandês Jean, o inglês Alfie e o americano Brooklyn, com o nome do bairro de Nova York de que Kirby tanto gosta. Mais do que qualquer outra equipa da banda desenhada da época, os Boy Commandos deixaram o seu ambiente urbano pelo Pacífico e os campos de batalha da frente europeia. Jack não tardaria a fazer o mesmo.
From 1941 to 1943, the US government prepared for war on both the Pacific Front and the European Front. Actually, at that time, Jack Kirby was very successful at DC Comics. He was producing the Boy Commandos, and the title was selling like crazy, millions of copies a month. And the same as Superman and Batman. They moved to a new location. They moved to Manhattan Beach, south of Brooklyn, and they had a wonderful sea view, and they become air raid ward.
Yes, an air raid warden. So basically what they were people that would volunteer, and they'd look out over the ocean. They'd look for U-boats that were, popping up to potentially attack America's shores. So we had them all over the country, and yeah, he had volunteered to do that when they first moved there.
Uns meses depois, no auge do seu sucesso, Kirby é obrigado a suspender o seu trabalho. É chamado para servir em junho de 1943. Longe de Nova York, no Camp Stewart, perto de Atlanta, Georgia, o soldado Kirby faz o seu treino militar. A variedade de etnias que lá encontrou ajuda-o a abranger os seus horizontes culturais e artísticos. É a primeira vez que Jack está longe de casa e descobre como é o mundo lá fora. Durante algum tempo continua a trabalhar na banda desenhada, mas é obrigado a parar por falta de tempo. Encontra algum consolo ao desenhar retratos de colegas em troca de cigarros. Mas apesar da sua dedicação ao esforço de guerra, através da banda desenhada, Jack era na realidade um soldado contrariado.
A Sherman tank, M4. Yeah, really huge. They mass produced it during World War II, 50,000 of them.
Wow.
Oh.
Look at this infantryman.
Yeah. So this machine gun, your grandfather was working in a machine gun section, just like that guy.
Yeah. I mean, you have these guys that had never seen a weapon, let alone fired one, with minimal training. They send them overseas and say, okay, have at it. It must have been horrifying. But
yeah. That's what he told you?
Yeah.
Did he speak about that?
Yeah. I mean, he had never, really picked up a weapon at all as far as a gun, but they trained him well down in Georgia, and they sent him off, and the rest is history.
A banda desenhada continuou a aparecer nos seus treinos, por vezes de forma inesperada.
Oh,
yeah.
Take a look at that. It's a real comic book, like the ones your grandfather was producing during World War II.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's not the Boy Commandos, unfortunately, but...
No. Good condition, though.
Yeah.
Alors là, je vais vous montrer une petite BD que les soldats américains avaient dans leur package, en même temps que leur ration. Donc il s'agit d'une petite BD Private Bill, donc qui retrace un petit peu, donc qui avait sans doute pour but de les distraire un petit peu compte tenu des circonstances.
La jolie infirmière. Ah, c'est amusant, c'est humoristique. Il y a des jolies filles. C'est la vie d'un soldat qui fait ses classes.
Tout à fait.
Il y a toujours le sergent qui enquiquine le private, le seconde classe, qui se retrouve à la corvée de pommes de terre. C'était donc dans le pactage des Américains qui partaient.
Dans le pactage avec les rations, voilà.
Comme quoi les comics, c'était aussi quelque chose d'important pour les GI.
O soldado Kirby poderá ter lido o livro durante as sessões de treino. Os seus camaradas também liam o Capitão América ou o Boy Commandos nos dormitórios, enquanto foi lançada a grande ofensiva na Europa.
The idea of the invasion was never a secret. right? There was an enormous political pressure, particularly from Russia, to open up a Western front for the war. The Brits were anxious to see something happen and to take pressure off them as well. There was originally hope, I think, of having D-Day happen a year earlier.
A Operação Overlord tem início em junho de 1944. Foi este o nome de código dado à Batalha da Normandia, que mobilizou 3 milhões de soldados aliados entre 6 de junho e 12 de setembro de 1944. Foi a maior ofensiva militar de todos os tempos. Foi decidido que as forças aliadas iriam desembarcar em França, na costa da Normandia.
Men and machines took their places in the waiting ships. The men were British, American, Canadian, some of them veterans of Africa, Sicily and Italy, some new to battle.
As tropas embarcam em navios em Inglaterra para atravessar o Canal da Mancha. Enquanto isso, 150 mil homens aterram de paraquedas no interior para dar apoio aos desembarques. São lançados quase 4 mil soldados. Sainte-Mère-Église é a primeira cidade a ser libertada pelas forças americanas.
Wow.
This mannequin commemorates the ordeal of John Steele. He was a paratrooper and he jumped on the morning of June the 6th. Oh. And he was stuck on the steeple of the church. And so he remained there for 3 hours and the battle was raging beneath.
Wow, that's amazing. It literally kind of reminds me of a Boy Commandos page. Again, my grandfather drew paratroopers who were coming over to Europe, and one, of course, got stuck in a tree. And just like John Steele, the German soldiers were coming to get him. He survived that ordeal, which was wonderful.
Sainte-Mère-Église marca o início da Batalha da Normandia. Um momento histórico simbolizado pelo marco do quilómetro zero.
It's the start of Liberty Road. That's the liberation of France.
Well, it all started right here.
Yes, in Sainte-Mère-Église.
Oh, amazing. It's beautiful. And I might add, kind of looks a little like Captain America.
Absolutely, it looks like Captain America. Well, you know, Liberty as a death tool, very important because, 10,000 paratroopers died during the Battle of Normandy.
Durante a noite, os aliados bombardearam a costa da Normandia. Pontes e túneis foram destruídos. A resistência francesa, alertada pela rádio, sabotou os meios de comunicação para ajudar os soldados de paraquedas a avançar. Na manhã de 6 de junho, a frota dos aliados aproxima-se das praias da Normandia. O objetivo é abrir uma frente ocidental contra a Alemanha nazi. Chegou a altura de desembarcar. Com os seus camaradas, Jack Kirby segue o evento pela rádio no Camp Stewart. Tem um sentimento misto de ansiedade e alegria. Passam-lhe pela cabeça imagens de uma guerra que tinha imaginado um ano antes.
The Germans didn't expect this attack in Normandy. Actually, the weather was so bad, and they expected the attack to come from the Pas-de-Calais, because it was closer to England, and the weather was so bad. So, well, consequently, there was, well, practically no one in Normandy at that time, only two German infantry divisions, wow. The 352nd and the 711th.
So we had basically thousands of people coming over. What did they do when they got here? How did they attack?
So, imagine the horizon filled with ships. You know, you had something like 6,000 ships, including warships and troop carriers. Wow. They were transporting 150,000 men with their equipment and vehicles.
And it wasn't just Americans. There were quite a few different countries involved. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So you had the British, you had the Americans, you had the Canadians, but you had also French, Belgian, Czechoslovak, Norwegian, Poles. Many people from every allies.
Everyone came. So. Yeah. Basically, like a year before that actually happened, my grandfather and Joe Simon and Boy Commandos actually talked about it, but not just talking, they showed it, you know, in the pages of the comic book. So they had thousands of planes coming over into Europe, and they had the troop carriers, and they had people storming up the beaches, you know, kind of like this one. Very large bluffs, you know, overlooking the sea. So it's amazing that they almost foretold it in a way. How did they come up with that idea?
We think that it might be by the films they were watching in the theaters at that time. So because they went to the movies and they could see the Battle of Midway by John Ford, for example, or The Flying Tigers by David Miller that came out in 1942. And so these films were presenting some landings on the Pacific shore. So it's probably that inspired them, and so they just changed the scenery.
Os bombardeamentos aumentam com a aproximação da frota. Os navios não podem atracar perto das praias. As tropas de assalto são transferidas para barcas, cada uma com 200 homens. Estas imagens são bastante famosas. Alguns desenhos de Kirby de 1943 são réplicas quase perfeitas destas imagens históricas.
The United Nations have made their first landings on the soil of Western Europe. Another of the great decisive battles of world history has been joined. This is the day for which free people long have waited.
Depois de chegarem às praias, os GI são alvos fáceis. É um massacre. A ondulação não permite que os carros de combate sejam descarregados nas barcas. Os alemães disparam de bunkers construídos na praia de uma artilharia de costa em Longues-sur-Mer e Pointe-du-Hoc.
Here we are in the bunker at the edge of the Pointe-du-Hoc, and we were exactly where the German soldiers were when they could see the Armada coming.
Oh, I can only imagine the thoughts that were going through the soldiers' minds, you know, looking up at the Germans. The Germans could see them for miles away, and realizing that they had to come and storm this place. You know, it's, what, about 100 feet or so, 30 meters, you know, from the ocean, and they had to crawl on their hands and knees to get up here. It must have been horrifying for them.
And only 90 of them could survive and could continue the fight after that. Can you imagine? This is one of the bunkers of La Pointe du Hoc. And as you can see, there's no artillery anymore.
Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone, and it was gone way before the Rangers came here, because the German troops were afraid of the bombing by the aircraft, and they removed their artillery. They protected them in the countryside nearby. And when the Rangers arrived, well, it was a tough fight, you know, because they were, firing on them, but there was no artillery.
Em 1943, os Boy Commandos travam uma batalha incrivelmente parecida, na qual escalam uma falésia, atacam bunkers e expulsam os inimigos. Na realidade, a terra cheia de crateras em redor dos bunkers é um testemunho da intensidade da batalha.
The LSTs land their cargoes on the beach.
O impasse em Omaha Beach é finalmente quebrado. As tropas invasoras fazem um avanço crucial com o apoio de carros de combate. A chegada de veículos motorizados marca o fim da primeira fase do desembarque.
Now more and more troops move inland to push the enemy back.
Foi um desastre para o inimigo, mas foi também a altura de fazer contas às primeiras vítimas mortais. E houve muitas perdas de ambos os lados. Depois dos combates, Omaha Beach foi apelidada de Omaha Sangrenta. Os soldados americanos que morreram foram enterrados ali perto, no cemitério americano de Colville-sur-Mer. Em memória dos combatentes, é feita uma cerimónia neste local todos os dias do ano. Recolhem e dobram a bandeira dos Estados Unidos. Esta tarde, Jeremy e Jean são os convidados de honra. É um momento cheio de emoções para Jeremy, pois ele sabe que o seu avô também podia ter morrido em solo francês.
It's beautiful. Yeah. My grandfather's flag. Hanging. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we were very fortunate to attend to such a ceremony.
Yep. Yeah, it's one of probably my most prized possession is his flag that they, give when he passes away, that the government gives. They fold it up. We have it in a nice case in the living room, and it's kind of up high, so it looks out over the living room when people come in.
It's a flag.
Yeah.
Here at the Normandy American Cemetery, we have 9,388 service members that are honored here. Also, on our Wall of the Missing, we have 1,557 service members whose names are inscribed on the Wall of the Missing as well.
I imagine it's just it's really awe-inspiring to see how they're treated. You know what I'm saying? Like the people that are burying here, they're so. I feel like it's just a wonderful testament to the sacrifice that they gave. So it's nice to see.
Yeah, it's just one of the promises that was made to the families that they allowed their loved ones to be buried in one of our cemeteries that they will forever be taken care of. So that's in not just Normandy, but the 26 cemeteries and 30 monuments around the world that we take care of on a daily basis.
Well, I heard say that the first tombs were buried in Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer before being put here in Colville.
Yes, the first temporary cemetery was in fact in Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, but it only lasted for approximately a day when the commanders decided to have it moved because they didn't want the soldiers that were arriving after the first wave. The first thing they see is grave sites of their comrades, so they were eventually moved further inland.
Estes milhares de soldados sacrificaram-se de forma corajosa. Jack Kirby prestou-lhes uma homenagem antecipada no final do 4º volume do Boy Commandos. Heróis e aliados de todas as nações fazem um grito de guerra de amor pela liberdade para construir um mundo melhor. Na noite de 6 de junho de 1944, os americanos constroem 2 portos artificiais para transportar tropas e materiais. O Mulberry A, em Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, e o Mulberry B, em Arromanches. O Mulberry A desapareceu, mas os vestígios do Mulberry B ainda são visíveis.
Look at this thing.
It's still there after 75 years. It's a Phoenix caisson, so still there.
Yeah, it's amazing. They just looks like you can imagine the troops and the tanks and the jeeps just coming right overhead, going into the village behind. You don't realize the size until you're up close. I mean, it's gigantic.
Yeah.
Impressive and terrifying, honestly. I mean, it's oh wow, it's eerie in here, but very impressive. Oh my gosh. Oh. Look at this. It's beautiful.
And on shore, you can see the other remains of this artificial harbor.
And look at this. It's Jack right on the caisson.
No, probably not your Jack, but well.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Oh, Jeremy, take a look. These are the Phoenix caissons.
Wow. I wish my grandfather would have known about this ahead of time. I think he would have had an amazing time drawing something, you know, just like this, like the machinery. It's
Yeah, absolutely, because he loved drawing machines and the incredible spacecraft and things like that, both for both Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
And so he would have loved that.
The harbors were very well organized, you see. They started from scratch. It was completed in 2 years. In example, first of all, they sank old battle or merchant ships. In example, 17 old merchant ships were sunk off Arromanches to get sheltered waters very quickly. To get a whole port with sheltered waters, they needed caissons, concrete caissons. 115 of them were sunk in a line to form a seawall, a 4-mile-long seawall around Arromanches. And inside, there were floating piers made of steel, which were the very first floating piers ever, connected to the shore by floating roadways.
So Jeremy, we're on Gold Beach, and you can see the artificial harbor, that's Mulberry Bay. In that direction, you have Arromanches, and before Omaha, where you had Mulberry, where your grandfather landed. On August the 23rd, well, then he could start his campaign of France. As far as I know, there's no artificial harbor in his comics, in your grandfather's comics.
No, I don't remember one. I think for the comic book page, it was maybe more impressive to have a giant, huge troop carrier landing directly on the sand, but much more realistic to have a harbor so that you can safely land the troops and get them to shore safely.
As semanas a seguir ao dia D foram decisivas. Durante o verão de 1944, mais de 2 milhões de soldados combateram na Normandia e nas aldeias perto de Cannes. Mais uma vez, é inevitável comparar estas imagens terríveis com as de Boy Commanders. E com as lutas de rua que Jack Kirby viveu na sua infância. Cannes é libertada a 20 de agosto, depois de combates extremamente violentos, precedidos por bombardeamentos que destruíram a cidade e provocaram a morte de 3 a 8 mil civis. A última grande batalha da Normandia teve lugar na mesma altura, na região de Falaise e Argentan. A 19 de agosto, os alemães estão cercados em Falaise. As tropas alemãs, com cerca de 80 mil homens, fogem ou rendem-se. A Batalha da Normandia termina a 21 de agosto de 1944. Após 3 meses de combates, a Normandia é finalmente libertada da ocupação alemã. Durante esse período, Jack Kirby deixa o Camp Stewart e atravessa o Atlântico num grande cruzeiro com destino a Liverpool, em Inglaterra. Depois, é levado para Gloucester e de seguida para Dartmouth, para atravessar o Canal da Mancha. O seu destino é a Normandia.
So Jeremy, after his landing, your grandfather was sent to Verdun by truck, where he met General Patton's Third Army and joined the machine gun section. And then he participated to the second deadliest battle in France, the Dorno Bridgehead. Many people died there. Fortunately, not him.
Yes.
And but he was injured. You know, he had trench foot, and he had to be repatriated to England and then back to the States in 1945.
Wow. Yeah, that's he did. He earned actually a Silver Star for his service to his country during the war. In fact, I have a few things I want to show you. First, we have his infantryman. So he was an infantryman in the Army, as well as a private first class. So this is his private first class. The thing that really matters the most is, of course, a special bracelet that my grandmother had made for him. And here you can see it's his name inscribed, Jack Kirby. But what's really special is on the back, her initials, my grandmother, Rosalind Kirby, and the date, 1944. It's interesting though, because he, later on in life, he was able to take some of his war experiences, put them to paper. He created a character called Silver Star. And then even for DC Comics in the 70s, right before I was born, he was able to use a book that was called The Losers, and they allowed him to put some of his own experiences into the comics. So if you go back and read that book, you'll actually see the actual experiences that he went through in France, and you can read them right there in magnificent art. It's amazing.
You know, way before that, he was already a superhero, well, in a way, you know, because, well, through his characters, I mean, the Boy Commandos, and he became a real one with his battle in Moselle. Yeah. And then it certainly helped him generate the Marvel comics and the Marvel superheroes he co-created in the 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. I think his experiences during the war allowed him to really draw in some emotion, some angst, and his ability to then put that to paper, to then create these magnificent superheroes. I think it was an outlet that now we all get to benefit from. So every time we pick up a comic book, every time we go to a Hollywood movie, we all get to kind of share the same love for those characters that he had. So I think it's real special.